Production underwriting for Ruckus has been made possible in part by the generous contributions from Fred and Lou Hartwig and from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon, joined by the Ruckettes, Kansas City Star editorial writer Yael Abou-Hakka, Gwen Grant, president and CEO of the Kansas City Urban League, media and communications consultant Mary O'Halloran, and joining us this week, Crosby Kemper III, head of the Kansas City Library System and host of Meet the Past on KCPT. Well, the national spotlight can either enhance or debase a reputation, and the state of Kansas City's, after several weeks of intense exposure, sets up our first discussion. Yael's recent column suggests that the national attention focused on the senseless killings in Johnson County and the random shootings on area highways have shaken the city's image. This is of particular concern as Republican convention planners check out Kansas City as a potential site in 2016. Mayor Sly James says all the negative coverage will have no effect. But Yael, you don't seem so sure.
Well, no. I mean, if you're going to have, there are negative stories that affect your city, they're going to get attention. And what you hope is that things get solved, like at least right now, the alleged highway shooters in custody. So that's great. But, you know, Mayor James keeps going back and forth in this, and I applaud him sometimes and I get mad at him other times. He rightly says, look, we've got a homicide problem, because we do. We've got to do something about it. And I'm going to go ahead and draw attention to it, and we're going to do something about it. Then he'll kind of flip-flop. Well, we don't want to think it's, rocking in the streets of Kansas City is dangerous, which in general it's not. I understand that point of view as well. But you have to, when you're, the mayor of the city, I understand you're pumping things up, and that's all good. But my column was more about, let's be realistic about it, address the situation, which I think we have. I was in Boston over the weekend and just for the Boston Marathon, and it was one of those things where, boy, their image was really shaken last year, and yet what if they did? I mean, they turned that around, 180 degrees with Boston Strong. The marathon came back. Now, we don't really want to go through something like that, seriously, and we don't have an event as prestigious as the marathon. However, it does show that a city can, of course, come back from these kind of things. Johnson County, Steve Rosen, my colleague, wrote a column about Johnson County. They're not, we're not out here experiencing hate crimes every week. Absolutely true. When it does occur, though, you need to acknowledge it. You need to take care of it. You need to, move on from it with a realization that it does affect your image, and then you can polish your image from there by taking positive steps.
Well, Mary, if you haven't been to a city once or twice, you tend to think about it, don't you, in terms of what you read and what news coverage there is?
Well, I've been to a city once or twice. And
I'm sure you have.
I've actually been to Boston once or twice.
No, I mean, but the typical person, if you haven't traveled to a city, you think of it about.
But you know what? I don't know that I care too much. What I care about with regard to the killings at the Jewish Community Center and the poor people that were shot at along the highways is that the community comes together, that we come together and take a new path. As the brilliant editorial in the Star pointed out, whoever wrote that knows how to write, that silence isn't the answer, that a whole list of things would be great for us to do in order to try at least to prevent these kinds of things from happening again. A good work of the police department getting the shooters on the freeway. What can we do about hate groups who have targeted the Jewish community in this case is to inform ourselves and not remain silent about the extremists who are out there, educate ourselves, and to come together in unity. That's what I care about.
Crosby, you're well-traveled. Do you think this is going to be a concern for how Kansas City is perceived?
Totally epiphenomenal in terms of how we're perceived. It will blow over. There was a great reaction from the faith community, as Mary's indicated, and I think that got national attention too. Good. I think the things that are important for Kansas City's image that are long-term are things like our tax subsidy passion and Google Fiber, for which unfortunately our passion is diminishing and ought to be increasing. Those are the important things nationally. But what I wonder, Mike, is why are we spending all this time and effort trying to get a Republican convention that will just spend a lot of money on and people will forget after a while? Except I do like the fact that our liberal Democratic mayor is soliciting Republicans. That does my heart
Well, that
some
happened
good.
the last time we had a Republican convention, Crosby.
Yale, you did point out that all recent conventions have been held in statistically safer cities than Kansas City.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I agree with Crosby and Mary to the degree that things you can control your own image, but the image of the city as a dangerous place, when you're in the top 10 on murders and the top 10 on violent crime or close to it, that's not good. And that's what people look at some of these things. We all live here. We love the city, but people don't live here.
When I travel, I don't go looking, oh, what is the crime rate? Am I going to get shot when I go to the city? I actually look more at what are the attractions that will draw me there, because typically you're not going to be in those areas where those things are taking place. That's really not how that's assessed. I think our biggest challenge around the Republican convention has nothing to do with these two incidents or the murder rate in Kansas City. I think it's going to have more to do with, do we have enough hotels and all these other amenities that are necessary to draw a convention.
It's going to have to do with, do we have enough money?
And money and
All right.
hotels. It's not going to be how safe it is.
One might suspect the Kansas Board of Regents has more pressing concerns than what professors tweet. And one might also suspect that highly educated academicians would use good judgment when tweeting. But last winter, KU journalism professor David Guth went on social media and blamed the NRA for the Washington Navy Yard shooting deaths. As a result, the Regents adopted a policy giving state universities authority to discipline or fire employees for comments on social media contrary to the best interest of the institution. A group of professors and other employees say the policy has a chilling effect on open dialogue and wants it changed. The Regents seem reluctant. So, Mary, what is going to happen now?
Well, the next phase of this really unfortunate and I think kind of surprising thing. If I don't know Fred Logan well, but I certainly do know how far he's moved to the right.
He's a local attorney, and he's the chairman of the Board of Regents.
He's growing and showing sense.
Well,
That's called evolving, isn't it?
He's evolving. I think that's
Well, no,
the-
he's in a state controlled by Sam Brownback, and he is the head of the university's
the
Board of
voters.
Regents. And well,
But what's going to happen now? We have the two sides in disagreement. What is the next step? What is to happen?
oh, there are more than in disagreement. I mean, there really is a kind of a shocking.
What is the next step that's going to happen? What
Well, the
are we?
next step will be Fred's committee, which he heads the committee on the board that will report in May. That's
All right, and they're going to have a meeting, and they're still probably
will-
going to be in disagreement over what
They
should
will
be
be
allowed.
in disagreement about the following.
Well-
Should academic freedom and free expression be, which has traditionally been held in this country as sacrosanct in state universities and private universities alike, that is the very essence of what a university is.
Is
That's
this academic
of
freedom,
expression.
Crosby?
I think there is an academic freedom. There's a constitutional question, and they'll find that this policy won't hold water. But I will say, your description of academic freedom is wrong, Mary. There's speech codes throughout the United States in college after college after college. I think the real issue here is the way that David Guth, the professor in the KU Journalism School, expressed himself. And it's not about academic freedom, it's about the quality of the academic programs at KU. If I'm looking at the KU Journalism School and this is representative, the way he
that's a
expresses
different
himself.
question.
Well, let me.
I agree, but that's the real question.
Let me
the real
remind all of you and folks watching what this professor put on Twitter back in September of 2013, September the 16th. He writes, with regard to the Navy Yard shootings, the blood is on the hands of the hashtag NRA. Next time, let it be your sons and daughters. Shame on you. May God damn you. Now, is that the kind of thing that a university ought to say, well, that's fine, that's an
political speech.
expression of academic
That's
freedom?
political speech,
Should it
Mike.
be, well, should they be allowed to fire him? Which is the ultimate question is, okay, you said something that embarrassed KU, we're going to fire you. Now, I mean, that's the bottom line of what they want to basically do.
We can
and-
fire you.
No, they want
didn't
to.
fire
They want
him.
to.
Well, they want to,
No,
okay?
they
And
want to be
anybody
free
would say
to
something
on
like that, they
sabbatical.
want to fire. I kind of vacillate on this to a degree because I say all kinds of vituperative things on Twitter that people get upset about, but it's kind of like, well, I'm an opinion writer. I should be able to say that. He's got a little bit different situation. He is supposed to be a leader of young men and women and all that, and you're supposed to hold your tongue maybe a little bit to a degree. Although I would say that what he said was something that, sure, some people were thinking, but you don't always write what some people are thinking.
Well, I think the issue here is around that the subjectivity of the making a statement that's not in the best interest of the university. Yeah. I think that's where everyone just kind of like, what do you really mean by that? Because it's too subjective. It's too subjective. You can, you know, if an NRA person calls the chancellor of the university and says, this professor said something about gun control that I don't like, and I'm not going to fund you anymore. I'm not going to write a check anymore. Is that not in the best interest of the university? Well, therefore, the person's free speech is now in question, and it can be fired.
That's the most important.
That's what's wrong with it.
What you brought up is the most important phrase, and that's the one, that anyone could be fired who is a scholar of any sort at the university for saying something that somebody in the administration, namely the president, I suppose in this case, could find out, could decide is not in the best interests of the university. Political statements, the Supreme Court has ruled, are the most important aspect of the First Amendment. That's what the Supreme Court has said over and over again, right, Crosby? That when it's political speech, that's the kind of First Amendment speech that needs
the problem with what he said isn't the politics of it.
It was a very irresponsible,
stupid, demagogic, mean-spirited, simple.
But is there to be no?
And he teaches journalism.
Are there to be no restrictions on what an employee does?
Well, you know, the other issue of it is, you know, in my view, whose phone was he on? Was it
what
the
difference
property
does it
of
make?
Well, because if they're paying his phone bill and it's a property of the university, that's a little bit different. You can have more control over how a person uses it. But it was his phone.
I think one would hope professors at universities would have common sense and use restraint on occasion.
The talk show hosts would have common sense.
Well, a talk show host is not an employee in the state of Kansas.
By the taxpayer.
The unfairly and much maligned Fred Logan wants this policy adopted. Teachers should be free from institutional censorship or discipline, but their special position in the community imposes special obligations. That's a 1940 statement from the American Association of University Professors.
Since 1940.
It's the other statement that's questionable.
Well, with Crosby on the panel this week, it is a good opportunity to talk about the so-called border war between Kansas and Missouri and the role of Rex Sinquefield in helping promote it. During the recent tax season, Sinquefield, a St. Louis multimillionaire, maybe billionaire, funded television commercials urging Kansas Cityans to start businesses income tax-free in Johnson County, Kansas. Mayor Sly James accuses Sinquefield of trying to bankrupt Kansas City. Crosby, you know Kansas City business. You know Mr. Sinquefield. You and he co-founded the Show Me Institute. Do you think Rex Sinquefield has a desire to harm Kansas City?
Well, what Rex is doing, and I'm trying to do this, and the Show Me Institute is trying to do this with our research, is point out that the high tax policies in Missouri and Kansas City combined local and states, one of the highest tax rates in our region, maybe the highest tax rate in our region now. While Kansas is cutting across the board, cutting taxes, that policy is going to be more successful from an economic development point of view, particularly on the border. People will move from Kansas City, Missouri, into Kansas with the lower tax rates, and that our tax policies are a mess. Tax subsidies are the center of it. Building the sales tax in Kansas City, Missouri, to support various foo-foo projects like the streetcar, et cetera. This is bad economic development policy. The tax policy in Kansas City is wrong. That's what Rex is pointing out, and I agree with him.
He gets terrible press in Kansas City, I think it is fair to say. Is he disturbed by it at all? Does he care?
No, I mean, you know, he knows he's going to get this kind of press, and you know, Rex is a person who cares deeply about philosophical, political, and moral issues, and he thinks what he's doing is right. He's willing to spend his money on it, much like Mayor Bloomberg or George Soros, the difference being that Rex is right and they're wrong.
What's the Kansas City Star's objection to Sinquefield? He's often criticized in Star editorials.
Well, I mean, the economic impact of what he's talking about could be real if people really would pick up and move from Kansas City over to Kansas for tax reasons, which they don't do. I mean, They move for a lot of different reasons. Let's be very clear. I mean, the schools could be a reason. Your home is now over in Johnson County or Wyandotte County or whatever. But Kansas City is growing in population. Kansas City, as Crosby points out, is having higher taxes. We are paying for more things and better things in an older city. But we are taking care of these things that people keep saying, well, we want you to take care of infrastructure. Well, fine. We'll make you pay more for water. Oh, they're fixing the water things. Oh, we're going to make you pay more for sewer. Well, by the way, they're doing that in Johnson County right now, which Rex Sinquefield doesn't have a problem with, doesn't care about, doesn't know about more than likely.
Let's just get
480,000 to 460,000. How are we growing?
We've gone from 435,000 in 1990 to 459,787. That's a gain of 25,000.
480 in 2000.
Could we just start with
No, we
one
were
thing
not.
with Mr.
No, we were not.
Sinquefield?
We were
First of all, the
441,000.
most powerful man in Republican politics in Missouri is Rex Sinquefield. But he never wants to respond to newspaper reporters' calls. He never wants to have a nice big story in the Star. Nobody gets to meet. I don't know. Have you all met and had lunch with Mr. Sinquefield? Maybe.
Crosby, have you had lunch
does?
with Mr.
Rex and I have
But
met with
listen,
The guy who does his
come on,
bidding has had
Rex.
lunch with him.
Answer the phone,
Crosby,
Rex. And secondly, Crosby, you
That's
said that.
completely untrue, Mary. It's completely untrue. We've met with Rex is willing to meet with the Star anytime.
Good.
Steve Kraske
and as
savages him.
elite as
Mark
he and
that
his
tape.
friends are, God bless them for being elite. But let's get out where the people are and meet the people, Rex, because they want to see who's running the show.
Rex is
First
in
of all,
public meetings all the time.
let me
I don't
ask you
know-
this
I don't know what you're
question. You
talking
just said
about.
you agreed with him about tax policy, but you think the sales tax is too high. 2 years ago, his solution to Missouri's problems was to eliminate the income tax and whop the sales tax up by 15 cents on everybody in the state of Missouri. Surely you couldn't have agreed with that.
Well, it's better than the tax policy we have today. Rex and I have a little bit of disagreement about the progressivity of the tax code, but at the state level, a high sales tax, the research shows is not unconducive to economic development, whereas high marginal rates on corporate and income tax are. I mean, that's what the research shows.
Crosby, does Missouri have high taxes or low taxes or middle taxes? Missouri, state of Missouri.
The state of Missouri is in the middle, but if you add in local taxes, and you've pointed this out without aggregating them, Neil, but if you aggregate them in Kansas City and St. Louis, we have very high tax rates. If you move from Massachusetts to Kansas City or St. Louis, your taxes go up.
They would be lower if the governor hadn't vetoed the bill passed by the legislature
Well,
last year.
you want lower taxes for some people and higher taxes for others. It's the question is,
What Rex and I want to do is cut
Yep.
taxes across the board for everybody.
We're moving on. We're going to stop talking about one rich guy and start talking about another.
Oh, great.
Former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg is chairing and funding to the tune of $50 million a group named Every Town for Gun Safety. It's a gun control organization designed to counter the popular National Rifle Association, the NRA. Kansas City Star columnist Mary Sanchez likes the idea of every town, dislikes Bloomberg as the public face of it. Sanchez fears that he's the best membership recruitment the NRA could hope for, a walking, talking, big gulp banning embodiment of government overreach. Is she right? Will Bloomberg's efforts to fight the NRA actually strengthen it and improve its positions, Gwen?
I don't think so. I know that Bloomberg, I agree that he was overreaching as mayor with the big gulp, while we would agree that it's not a healthy choice, but it's a person's right to make that choice, and it's not one that the mayor or the government should interfere with. However, Bloomberg has a degree of arrogance about him, but he's a self-made billionaire, and being a self-made billionaire sometimes comes with arrogance. But I think I don't find him to be any more obnoxious in his public commentary about issues with, that he's passionate about than Wayne LaPierre, the head of the NRA. And I think that if you're going to have someone out there challenging the NRA, I think Bloomberg is a good person to do that.
He's had several of these groups, I think, and this is the latest one. What does he hope to accomplish, do you
Well,
think?
I hope he's putting $50 million. He's putting his mouth where, his money where his mouth is on this issue, and so certainly
do
he
what?
has to be an advocate and lobby for stronger gun control.
He wants to get people
Yeah, he wants
energized,
people
Destiny, to
energized,
go to
and
the
he- and I
polls
think
and
he
vote
could
for
go
people
out,
who
Yes.
might
and I think
support gun
and a
control
voice
measures.
like his could go out and mobilize and motivate a base. And I also, Mary talked about the middle ground folks, but I think the middle ground people have the intellectual capacity to discern and to differentiate between, well, I don't like Bloomberg as his style, but the substance of what he's saying is what they will focus on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are occasions just on Sinkfield where I might agree with what he wants to do, but it's like, okay, I'm going to have to put aside what kind of personality he is. Same thing with Bloomberg.
Yeah.
He basically wants more, better gun control in the United States. And he's going to try to tap into people who do support background checks, and maybe they can elect people who would actually vote for that. Now, so what's he going to need to do that? He's going to have money. They're going to have to money in political campaigns to do it. So he brings a big wad of cash and throws it in there and tries to elect people who are for gun control. Now, the NRA will fight back on that, and that's, we all talk about, that's the American way. I think it's good to have somebody fight the NRA.
And Mary Sanchez is also says that Bloomberg hopes that moderate members, if you will, of the NRA may join
Right.
forces with what
Right.
Bloomberg wants.
Right.
Look,
It's
the real issue here isn't Bloomberg or the NRA. It's whether gun control laws are effective, and they're not. In New York City's murder rate is down to 333 compared to Kansas City's 110. And is that related in any way, shape, or form in either place to gun control? And it is not, even though New York has got good gun control laws. It's related to the way they police
And
themselves.
they use those gun control laws to get
No,
guns off the street
no.
too. They did, Crosby.
Yeah. But it is unrelated to that, because then you look at Chicago, which has even stronger gun control laws than New York, and their murder rate has been much, much higher. And it isn't until they went to the CompStat kind of things in Chicago that their murder rate
A little
started to
different
decline.
twist to all of this, I think.
It's not related
that we
to
just
gun
had
control.
a moment in this city a week and a half ago now when it didn't matter where I went, when we talked, when we could stop crying and start talking to each other about what just happened. Almost everybody said, how does a killer, an alleged killer like that, get all those guns? And I really think that when people are confronted with the awful horror of these crimes, and they sit down and talk about how is it possible that he had a car full of everything, apparently had an assault weapon rifle.
He didn't get them
so on.
legally, did he?
He killed them with a shotgun.
Well,
didn't-
maybe. I don't know. We don't know. We've never.
I mean,
there's
criminals
been
don't
nothing.
abide by gun control laws.
He
We know
has
that.
not been on the criminal list lately.
He's a felon.
He's a
He
felon.
is a felon. He shouldn't have
Felon.
guns.
Shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Well,
By
should
law.
he? Well, who should be watching out for whether or not he buys guns or gets them or trades for them? He could go to a gun show and get one, Mike. That's
Oh, no,
There's a
with
huge
the
amount of
background
attention
check.
to him. There are people following him.
well, not so much as we would
You want-
have noticed.
You want the
last
government
week.
to surveil everyone?
They already do.
You want NSA to get involved in this?
No, they wanted. We ought to be
killed
doing.
the people he killed with a shotgun.
We need
Extremists in this
fewer
country
guns
need
in
to be
circulation.
Nobody
We need
plans
tighter
to ban.
controls on guns.
Okay.
period.
We turn now to Roast and Toast, where the Ruckettes say yay or nay to people and events in the news. And we start tonight with Gwen.
Well, since we're talking about guns, I'm going to roast the people who witnessed the horrific killing at the service station on Cleveland and fled the scene. And maybe you were afraid and you fled the scene, but why have you not stepped up and provided information to KCPD so that they can apprehend this horrible criminal who took the life of a father and injured his son, who will be permanently damaged by this? Please speak up when you see a crime. It's not snitching, it's reporting crime, and it's your responsibility.
I want to toast Literacy Kansas City, the adult literacy program in town. Carrie Coogan, the executive director. They're having their annual Spelling Bee fundraiser tonight. There are over 200,000 illiterate or barely literate people, adult people in Kansas City. It has an effect on everything, on education of children, on families, on economic development, and Literacy KC is doing something about it, and they should be toasted.
Well, this is a roast to Governor Sam Bramlett. He can't make up his mind. All right, so he doesn't want the big bad federal government telling him what to do on guns or on health care. So he opts out of that. He wants to get the state out of that. And then when it happens a smaller unit of government like Johnson County wants to pass, maybe some kind of gun control law. No, you can't do that either. So it's kind of like the state is the only perfect entity here, and we all know Kansas ain't perfect.
Oh, isn't it, Yale? So I want to toast all those people who made every one of the community gatherings around the horrific events of last week so positive. The family, the Corcoran family in particular, and Terry Lamano's family, all said that they wanted something good to come out of these terroristic acts, to call them for want of a better thing. And because we were doing Ruckus on Thursday, I was unable to get to the Jewish Community Center, but I did go to Adam Hamilton's United Methodist Church of the Resurrection, and 3,000 people gathered. It was the most positive gathering of a religious sort I have ever been to in this city. Adam Hamilton is the greatest preacher I've ever heard. It's marvelous.
I saw the coverage on television. I saw the service on television, and I would concur. It was a remarkable presentation by all involved.
Thanks to the family. He worked with the family to make it happen, Mike.
And finally, a roast to a familiar target, the Wyandotte County Commission. It's resisting a legal challenge from a citizen who wants elected officials to fill that year-long vacancy on the commission. Commissioners tried and failed twice, with both votes ending in a tie. Commissioners say they have sole discretion in the matter and are not subject to court action. In other words, they will decide whether to appoint someone, not the courts, and certainly not the voters. Government of the commission, by the commission, and for the commission. And that's Ruckus for this week. We're back next Thursday at 7:30. Now, on behalf of the Ruckettes and the Ruckus crew, Mike Shannon saying thanks for watching and good night.